Hello and welcome to the channel. This is part 2 of 2 of my discussion of gender. In part 1 I outlined the general topic of metaphysics and gave an introduction to the question, and in this half I'm going to look at all the different metaphysical positions one might take and give them a bit of a critique. I apologise that my schedule isn't quite what I say it's going to be sometimes, but I'm in Wales and lockdowns kind of come and go, and obviously it's coming up to Christmas so everything's a bit all over the place, so apologies for this being late, but I should still be producing videos about once a week, and this is the last part of the gender series. The question to investigate that I outlined in part 1 is just going to be, what do we mean by the terms man and woman? So when I look at these different theories, that's the main thing I'm going to be focusing on. I'm going to throw in a few criticisms as well. I don't really have time to go into all the arguments for the positions, so I'm just going to outline what the positions are and where I think they go wrong or where I think they go right. So with that all out the way, let's get into it and see our first position. The first thing I'll be covering, I'm kind of going to split into two. It's biological or physical essentialism. I know I didn't include physical essentialism in the list of things we covered last time, but I thought about it since then and it's worth talking about here as well. Biological essentialism is what you might call the traditional view. People with male bodies are men, people with female bodies are women. So that's all there is to the terms man and women. Gender doesn't exist or isn't worth talking about. You just have the two distinct categories that are sort of provided by nature, right, as sex. This is the position usually attributed to conservatives and TERFs as well, trans exclusionary radical feminists. And their position is one I want to include here. I'm aware that some people find the term TERF to be a slur. I'm sorry if anyone finds that offensive, but it is an easy way of describing what the position is, so I might use it a few times in this video. And just a note on that, it's a weird time when like the radical feminists who were once at the forefront of liberal thinking are now being bundled in with the gender conservatives and are being kind of demonized by a lot of people on the left, having these old-fashioned views, which it seems to me flow pretty naturally from second-wave feminism, but that's a whole other topic. The main problem with this view, and the reason I reject it, is that it's very limiting and stifling. Obviously to trans people who are basically told, you don't have a category that exists, you are not capable of being trans people, you are what you are from birth. And as I said in the previous video, I think all gender positions are just metaphysical positions, so I don't see the point in adopting one that makes lots of people unhappy or feel limited in what they can do. So this is a position that I reject. I've divided it into biological essentialism and physical essentialism because there are people who believe that you can change a gender if you perform the requisite physical changes, right? So some people might be happy to say that Caitlyn Jenner is female, but maybe that Elliot Page isn't female, since Elliot Page hasn't gone through a physical transformation like Caitlyn Jenner has. It feels like even some traditionalists might be okay with this view. If you are by all appearances female or male, they might be happy to concede that you're male or female. But it's still not enough for the radical gender types who want you to be able to just change your gender on a whim without having to go through any sort of arduous physical changes. The second position is to see gender as a pattern of behavior. So a man is anyone that acts in the way that a man normally does or should, and a woman is anyone that acts in the way that a woman does or should. The problems with this come up pretty instantly when you start to put it like that, is like, how are men and women supposed to act? What kind of patterns of behavior are we supposed to see from people gendered male and female? It seems almost certain that this will rely on traditional gender norms, so that you would be a woman if you have long hair and wear skirts and makeup or something like that, meaning that at least old school feminists will have a problem with that, right? Because that was the kind of gender stereotyping they were fighting against in the 70s and onwards. There are some interesting questions thrown up by this view, like what would my gender be if I was forced to behave one way or another? So if I was a female growing up in the 1950s, say, I might have heard some feminist thinking, and I might think, well, I don't want to be female, I want to reject those gender stereotypes. But if people make you act like that, then do you have to become that thing? These are kind of the metaphysical questions left over by this theory. One video I'm going to reference here quite a bit is the ContraPoints video, which I'll leave a reference to and a link down below. At around 8:20 there, ContraPoints seems to endorse this view and seems to say that acting a certain way makes her female, but then slightly later on seems to reject that view and says that acting like a traditional female isn't necessary to make you female and doesn't have anything to do with it. To be honest, like I say, I'll reference the video a few times because ContraPoints is really interesting and prolific on this topic, but I find her really self-contradictory on this. I'm not quite sure what her position is, so I'll sprinkle her in here and there. But my main criticism of this view is going to remain that it relies on these outdated gender stereotypes, which no one really wants to actively enforce, but everyone kind of incidentally reinforces by saying women act this way and men act this way. If there's a way of like meting out what women and men act like without relying on those traditional norms, the theory could do a lot better, but I've never even heard an attempt to explain how one can act like a man or act like a woman without relying on traditional gender norms. The third position then is to see gender as mental behavior, not as outward behavior, not going and doing things, but thinking in certain ways or with thinking or certain patterns. So a man is anyone that thinks in a certain way, and a woman is anyone that thinks in a certain way. I won't be spending too much time on this position because it kind of mirrors the last one. It's just internal behavior instead of external acting behavior. It relies on the same sort of traditional gender norms. I mean, no feminist, it seems to me, is going to be happy with the idea that women think in a certain way. That's just going to bring back stereotyping. So it's a mirror of the last one. It has the same explanatory virtues, but the same kind of problems. The one benefit it does have, it seems to me, is that no one can now be forced to be a certain gender, since no one can really force you to think like anything. People can force you to act a certain way and like behave a certain way and follow rules, but they can't make you think anything. So no one can force you to be a gender under this view, which is a positive thing, I think. Position 5 then is the one that gender radicals, the people who want a big change, seem to be pushing for at the moment, which is just that anyone can be any gender at any time and mostly for any reason. It's just a matter of personal affirmation. You just have to affirm the idea, I am a man or I am a woman, and it becomes true. The idea is to make the concept as non-exclusionary as possible so that everyone is included, you're not shutting anyone out, and nobody ever has to feel bad about what gender they are. Sometimes qualifications are added. So for example, I imagine most gender radicals aren't happy with that guy. I think this was a real story. If not, just imagine this happening. A weightlifter, for example, that changes their gender to female, breaks all the female world records, and then goes back to being male, right? It seems like most gender radicals would look at that as not a proper affirmation because they didn't really mean it. They didn't really actually want to become female. They just wanted to troll people and pretend they broke a world record. So there are some qualifications to this, but broadly, if you really want to be a woman and if you really want to be a man, you can be that thing just by wanting it and mentally affirming it. Important to note that there seems to be no link between behavior and gender on this view. So if I say, well, I really like going to the pub and drinking pints of beer and playing pool with my male friends and talking about women and cars and that sort of thing, that makes me a woman, right? So I can just say that, and that's absolutely true. There doesn't have to be any necessary link between types of behavior and types of gender across people. You can say that any kind of behavior, even traditionally male behavior, is what makes you female. There is no rules to this kind of thing anymore on this view. And that really is the main problem for me. Once you adopt this view, you kind of lose any kind of definition that the terms man or woman might have. They don't refer to traditional behavior or traditional patterns of thought or your biology. So what exactly are they referring to? Well, they can refer to anything you like. Someone could change their gender without really changing anything. You don't need to change your clothing or your behavior. You don't even need to change your pronouns if you don't want to. It's not necessary that someone has a certain gender and gets called a certain pronoun. So I could change my gender tomorrow if I really wanted to, and nothing about my life could change. Which is very strange then, because most gender radicals seem to put a lot of importance on gender and gender transitioning, but it doesn't really mean anything anymore, right? Like, if a gender radical came up to me and told me they decided to change their gender, I'd have no idea what they meant, because they might not be changing their behavior or their pronouns or anything else. So the term kind of becomes meaningless. To illustrate this, let's imagine that a child or a non-native English speaker who genuinely doesn't know what the term man and woman means asks a gender radical what they mean. Maybe they heard them and they're not sure, they're confused. So they say, what does the term man mean? The gender radical would have to say, well, a man is anyone that calls himself a man. To which, of course, the other person can respond, okay, but what is a man? Like, I don't like gender being tied to traditional gender norms, but at least that gives it meaning. Or biology, right? At least you understand what is meant by the terms there. But now they could mean anything to anyone. And once anything can mean anything to anyone, it kind of ceases to be a concept. We talked about intersubjective beliefs in the last video, the kind of things that become true because lots of people believe them. And we talked about gender, which almost everyone agrees is a social construct, is one of those intersubjective truths. But if there's no agreement, if one person can say, well, I go to the pub and drink beer and play pool, so that makes me a man, and another person says those same things make me a woman, and there's no contradiction there, then there's no real meaning. There's no truth value to any of the statements. They're just, the terms man and woman become just a noise you make with your mouth. They don't really have any purpose or meaning to them. And this is all the result of trying to make the definitions non-exclusive. Because of course a non-exclusive definition doesn't really make any sense. The term spoon, right, has a definition, and that's what makes it useful. Because it says, here are the things in the world that are spoons, and by extension, here are the things in the world that aren't spoons. Its being exclusive is completely fundamental to what it means, right? We need to know that a spoon is different from a knife. Otherwise it'll be very confusing around the dinner table. Similarly, if gender radicals use terms like men and women, I have no idea what it is they're referring to other than people that want to be men and women, but I have no idea what the terms men and women are on this conceptual view. So those are the 5 positions I'm going to criticize. The 6th position I'm going to put forward as the one I endorse. Like I say, I don't think metaphysical claims are capable of being true or false. So I'm not saying this is the true reality of it all. I don't think there is a gender reality. It's all just something we make up to kind of order our lives and make them make more sense. I am what I would call a gender eliminativist or gender abolitionist. I think the term gender critical is also used sometimes, but that kind of gets tied to TERF, so I'm not sure if that's something else. Essentially, I believe that gender should not be part of your conceptual framework. We'd all be better off just not believing in it at all. There are various eliminativist views in philosophy, ones that seek to eliminate a certain concept. You might be an eliminativist about art, because it's just a broad and vague term, or you might be an eliminativist about morals, like objective moral values. You might think we want to get them out of our thinking because they just confuse the picture. And there are eliminativists about gender. It seems to me the benefits of this view are obvious. It gets what the radical gender people want, which is a completely non-exclusionary definition of gender, because gender doesn't exist anymore, right? It doesn't have to have any kind of impact on policy. So now people can do whatever they like. They can act any way they like. They can call themselves whatever they like. They can ask other people to refer to them by whatever pronouns, and that's all fine and good. But there's no actual truth claim being made when you say something like, I am a man in gender and I am a woman in gender. There's no hard truth to the matter beyond what your sex is, and it doesn't matter. Just let people of either sex behave however they like, be nice to them, treat them kindly, and respectfully, listen to what their pronouns are and respect them for that. But there's no deep gender truth to the matter, because gender doesn't actually exist. ContraPoints, who's normally very good, does a really poor job attacking this in her video from around 10:25. She specifically singles this out and then starts this weird little bit where she talks about how if we were all gender eliminativists, gender would be outlawed. So that she wouldn't be able to have any kind of gendered expression. She couldn't have hair that was long or short because that's girly or boy. And she couldn't have inflections with her voice or move her hands in a feminine way or anything like that. Of course, that's not what gender eliminativists are pushing for. I think Contra knows that because Contra is pretty good at this stuff. So it's a real weak counter argument that she puts forward. If you imagine a toy shop with a boy aisle and a girl aisle, gender eliminativists don't want to get rid of all the toys and get rid of all the boy toys and the girl toys and leave only gender neutral toys. They just want to not call those toys boys' toys and girls' toys. So you can still have trucks and princess castles, but you no longer refer to them as boys and girls' toys. It's much less socially limiting that way. Contra also kind of subtly makes the point that it would be very difficult to convince everyone to not believe in gender, which isn't an argument against the theory at all. She has her own gender theory that it would probably be very difficult to get 8 billion people to agree with as well. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. And to take things to extreme, it was difficult to convince people the Earth revolved around the sun, but that doesn't mean it wasn't worth doing or that the theory wasn't correct. The one thing I do want to mention is that Contra describes the gender abolition movement as a hate movement that just wants to get rid of trans people. It's a completely unjustified move in my book. I mean, it's just an ad hominem for one thing. You're not really attacking the theory, you're just saying, oh, well, the people who advance the theory are actually awful. But as I say, this position doesn't need to be tied to any policy. I'm super liberal on policy. I think you should be able to use whatever bathroom you like, compete in whatever sport you like. I don't even think the sex distinction should be there in the first place. People should be able to do whatever the hell they want, but there's no actual gender truth claims going on, in my view. I'm not against trans people. I don't want to force them to do anything at all. But I do think there is a proper way of viewing questions of gender. I think this is it. Just write them off. Gender isn't real. Don't let it make you happy or make you sad. It's a nothing. Do whatever makes you happy, and that's the main thing. So in conclusion then, my own position kind of annoys everybody. My policy position is going to annoy feminists because I don't think you should have sex distinctions in sports, toilets, the army, anything like that. any space that's open to a woman should be open to a man as well. I mean, sex and gender, since I don't actually believe in gender. And my metaphysical gender position is going to annoy the gender radicals, because I'm essentially saying that phrases like trans women are women and trans men are men, they're kind of nonsense phrases because they don't refer to anything. The definitions of the terms aren't clear enough. And honestly, I've tried every way I can to try and make sense of those statements. I know that a lot of people put a lot of stock in them and get very unhappy when that's contradicted. I guess all I can say is you shouldn't worry about that kind of thing. You should worry about policy. If you're not being allowed to do something, that's a big concern. And I don't want to stop anyone claiming that trans women are women. I would never outlaw that. You're perfectly welcome to make the argument. But I shouldn't be compelled to agree with it, and I don't agree with it, I'm afraid. ContraPoint's response to gender critical is one of the most thorough I can find, and it's riddled with ad hominems. It's just insisting that the people making, arguments against her essentially are just bad people who hate trans people and want them to suffer. And these are all just troll questions. Really below ContraPoint's usual standard. Very disappointing video. I've gone through the other gender positions and rejected them because of the fact they always end up relying on traditional gender norms, either gender equals biology or gender equals pattern of behavior in some way, that always just reinforce these stifling social categories, right, of male gender, female gender. I just think we should do away with them, right? Like, that's my metaphysical position, and that would be my sort of broader social position to advocate. Get rid of them. Don't have boys' aisles and girls' aisles, or boys' jobs and girls' jobs. Don't have anything of that. Just let people do what they want and let them be happy. So that's the end of my two-part series on gender. I hope I explained myself well enough. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. I really do hope I haven't upset anybody with this kind of talk. I know it tends to upset one side or the other. So I guess maybe I hope I've upset everyone equally. That's at least something to aim for. Please like the video if you like it, and share it with your friends if you know anyone else that would like it. It would really help the channel grow. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Till then, goodbye. Have a good one.